Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to EON Reality AVR Platform Academic Workshop. I'm Peter Looker, and I'm here to introduce you to the platform and how you might use it to develop meaningful student learning experiences. And I sincerely hope that by the end of the workshop, you will have a fairly firm idea of how you can easily use this platform for teaching and maybe even for students to do assessment and self-created lessons. A second title for the workshop might be Creating It Yourself in Your Office, because that's exactly what you can do with the EON platform. It doesn't require any kind of specialist technological knowledge. You will have noticed that EON Reality uses the term AVR for its platform, drawing on Paul Milgram's notion of a continuum between virtual reality and augmented reality, where virtual reality is an immersive, encompassing virtual reality experience, while augmented reality represents a digital overlay of the real with various forms of mixed reality in between. AVR neatly compresses this continuum into a single term, AVR. And frankly, it's easier to say than virtual reality and augmented reality, or virtual and augmented reality every time you want to refer to it. Let's start off with a quick look at the agenda. For the workshop, headline issues in higher education, teaching and learning, I'd like to raise a number of issues that I think are really probably quite urgent in terms of the way that we teach at universities. There's definitely a gap between what happens with students at universities and what they're capable of doing. That comes from many quarters, and I'll talk about that. And I'd like to talk about the idea of learning transfer as the absolute key to how we conceptualize the use of AVR. Introducing the EON platform and building lessons, I'm going to show you give you a demonstration from a teacher's point of view. That is, somebody who is actually at the end of all of this and using the EON platform, and using your disciplinary expertise to do it yourself, which will be an underlying theme for the whole of this workshop. It's effortless, affordable, self-service, and interconnected. Then I want to show you a template that my colleagues have constructed as a guide to integrating AVR into classes. And finally, a quick view of the Vault. Now, this is not a comprehensive view of everything that EON offers. That's not the purpose of this workshop. The purpose of this workshop is to look at it in relation to what might be happening in universities and what we need to do with students. However, if you want a really, really comprehensive view of what's going on with EON and the whole of the EON platform, then please follow this link and look at Dan Laeskar's, the EON founder. Look at his workshop, because it covers everything and you get a lot of information from it. Before going on to talk about the nitty-gritty of how to use the AVR platform, I'd like to make some considerations about the overall context of higher education into which AVR fits, both from inside the university and from outside the university. I've been working in universities now for about 35 years. A large amount of that time I've been working in teaching and learning development at a number of universities in different countries. And one of the things that I consistently hear from employers with whom we meet very often is that students come out of universities with a lot of knowledge, hard knowledge, but they don't know what to do with it. And that's backed up by a number of surveys, like the report here in the BBC WorkLife, that employers say students may have textbook knowledge, but they don't have the ability to take that knowledge to think critically, innovate, solve complex problems, and work well in a team. A survey by the Association of American Colleges and Universities in 2015 also found that there's a gap between what students think they can do when they leave university and what employers think they can do. There are a number of measures of this, and one of them was what students think they are prepared for in terms of applying knowledge and skills in the real world. 59% of students thought they were prepared, compared to 24% of employers. This gap between knowledge and application is something that's now acknowledged at both governmental and institutional levels. Singapore Minister of Education for Higher Education and Skills, Mr. Ong Ee Kung, has suggested that a university education might not be the be-all and end-all for successful employment. And he's hinting that the way universities do not necessarily give students the ability to use their knowledge in an agile way in the world is one of the problems. Everyone should have depth of knowledge and agility in applying their skills in different contexts, he has said. At the institutional level from the universities, you can see a response to this problem of the gap between knowledge and application in the way that they form their mission and vision statements about what kind of education they will offer to the students. This one from La Trobe University is only one example, but if you look at any websites around the world at universities, you'll see similar kinds of statements. The future university will involve co-creation between the university, its students, and its educational industry and community partners. The idea here being, of course, that what universities need to do is to stop being cloistered places of knowledge and to connect and to form their curriculum in terms of those connections as well. But this problem of the gap between what students know and what they can do with what they know is not just a matter of what happens in the working world. It's also a problem of disciplinary learning, as Carl Wyman points out in the first 2.5 minutes of this video.
Stanford University.
So about 25 years ago, I got seriously interested in the question of why did these new graduate students coming into my physics research lab, how could they have done so well for so many years in physics courses and not be able to do physics? And that led me to first learn about and then participate in really a new way of thinking about science, teaching, and learning. And this is really the idea of approaching it like a science, and so that we do controlled experiments looking at different ways of teaching and measuring the learning that's produced between them, and figuring out then what works and why based on data, where we're judging what works on how much students are actually learning. Now, this is an area of research primarily carried out in undergraduate science courses. It was started in physics 30 or 40 years ago and is now spread across all the sciences, and we see quite similar results across them. And one of the things we found is the most revealing measure of learning are to look at situations where a simple relevant context to the topic you're trying to teach, and look at what scientists can do when posed with this question, what predictions they make and why. And then you ask students to do the same thing. And you compare the responses. Clearly, you often see big differences. But this is really the measure of what I'd argue is sort of flexible, useful knowledge, how well you can apply it in relevant situations. And we get very different results when we compare that measures with what people see from the usual course exams, which appear to be primarily testing if students have memorized certain facts and procedures that aren't good for too much beyond passing their physics course.
This gap between knowledge and the ability to apply it flexibly that employers and universities and researchers like Carl Wyman talk about is really a question of learning transfer. And I'd add here that learning transfer is not to be confused with knowledge transfer, which is a slightly different thing, or even substantially a different thing. Swedish educational psychologist Ferenc Martin, who's famous for formulating the difference between deep and surface learning, describes learning transfer in these terms. He says what is learned in one situation affects or influences what the learner is capable of doing in another situation. Can a graduate student encounter a new and previously unknown situation and know how to activate her knowledge appropriately at that moment? Can she use what she knows in a flexible way? Transfer is also a dynamic process that requires learners to actively choose and evaluate strategies. So during the learning process, in order to develop learning transfer, the students need to be able to practice these things, actively choosing and evaluating strategies, and so on. And that seems to me to be a perfect opportunity for augmented and virtual reality, because that's precisely what students are doing, actively choosing and evaluating. So now we're left with the question of how to teach for learning transfer. I sometimes think of this as trying to find a medium of translation from knowledge to the real world. And I'd like to stress that learning transfer is really very dependent on both the nature of the learning experience that students undergo and the kind of testing they have as well. To be blunt, rote learning of facts and procedures, as Carl Wieman points out in the video, does not lead to transfer. And this has been shown many times in a lot of different research efforts. As this quotation says here, one possible reason for this is that memory is context dependent, so transferring or recalling something that was learnt in a classroom setting to a fast-paced work environment isn't always easy. It's very clear that the traditional classroom is a long way from the world of work. And that goes back to what I'm saying about finding the kind of experience that serves as a translation between the knowledge and the real world. So let's now very quickly look at a couple of quite recent research papers on learning transfer and the usage of AR and VR. You can follow these up yourselves. I've given a bibliography at the end, and there are a number of other papers that you may wish to pursue as well. In this particular one, students were being taught lab safety. One group was being taught with the traditional safety manual that had been used for a long time, and the others through immersive VR. The major findings of the study were that students who received safety training in immersive VR performed better on behavioural transfer than those who trained with the same material with a conventional lab manual. Both groups performed equally on the MCQ knowledge base. But part of the point of this is that the researchers say that in order to see the learning gain, they had to test for learning transfer. Had they simply provided the traditional MCQ test and tested both groups, then in fact there wouldn't have been any difference. And this is a problem, I think, with a lot of the previous work that's been done on AR and VR, and that is that the measures of the learning gains remain the same as those in traditional teaching, and the assessment therefore can't capture the learning gains. This is a really important point made by this particular paper. For our purposes, though, the behavioural transfer test given to the students was intended to measure how well they could apply what they learnt to solving real problems in a high-stakes real environment. And this is where the experimental group using virtual reality was superior to the control group using the lab manual. So the students who had learnt through immersive virtual reality were able, in my terms, to transfer their learning better than those who had used the lab manual. This is exactly what Carl Wieman and Minister Ong are talking about as desirable outcomes of learning. The students are flexible, they know when to apply things, they know how to apply things. Let's make a direct link here then. I said earlier that I think of virtual reality and augmented reality in many ways as having the capacity to translate learning into real application. And that's what's happening here. The immersive virtual reality lab learning, lab safety learning, is actually a form of translation. Here we have a very interesting set of results from an experiment comparing a physical laboratory and a virtual laboratory in science and engineering education, and suggesting that post-test results show that participants in the virtual lab outperformed participants in the traditional condition on conceptual understanding, and also outperformed participants in the traditional condition with regard to procedural skills. Some of the reading that I've done suggests that one of the reasons for this is that the virtual condition actually gets rid of some of the distractions in the real environment and therefore can focus on the kinds of things that students want to learn. In this report from Mindshare, 151 smartphone users from the UK between the ages of 18 and 65 were given tasks that enabled them to compare using AR and non-AR experiments. This is from Mindshare. And what they found was that three things: AR drives high levels of visual attention in the brain, almost double that of non-AR tasks. And that right now, AR elicits a surprise response in the brain. And the third is that what's stored or encoded into memory is 70% higher for AR experiences. The title of the study is Using Neuroscience to Study the Effects of AR on the Brain.
So this part of the brain is associated with visual attention. It's what's occupying our eyes in the visual field. And we measure responses in both the left brain, which is attention for detail and words, and the right brain, which is attention for more the overall feel of something, the global aspects of processing. In the case of augmented reality experiences, we see levels of visual attention that are around double the levels that we see for the equivalent experiences carried out in a more everyday normal setting. In the case of an augmented reality experience, we're seeing levels of memory encoding that are around 70% higher than the levels we see for the same sort of experience carried out without the AR component.
As you can see from the following list, plenty of academic institutions have engaged with EON. Lots of very well-known universities from around the world have engaged. In fact, there are 500 academic institutions altogether. And not only the wealthy ones, but also other universities and plenty of K-12 institutions and also in vocational training. However, and this is a very interesting figure, even though 28% of higher education institutions, more than 26,000, have engaged in some level of VR deployment, 82% have not yet moved beyond the pilot stages. And there are probably a lot of reasons for that. I can imagine that plenty of people find certain parts of it difficult, that it's difficult to develop, difficult to use. But in fact, that's precisely the kind of point that EON Reality has really addressed in trying to make it easy for everybody to use at all levels. In looking at the overall platform, it's important to stress for users that EON AVR platform is agnostic. It's agnostic in that you can get data from 120 formats in native. It's also agnostic in that you can use all the headsets and all screens. You can take data in, you can generate content, you can manage it, you can manage all of your users, and everything's in the cloud. You can also create multi-user experiences where students and teachers around the world can experience the same VR or AR environment together. Also, a sophisticated analytic engine allows you to see not only if you passed the test, but how skilled you are in performing a task. AR Assist, where performance can be measured, is, I believe, going to be of enormous consequence and benefit in student assessment at universities in the future. We need to know if students can activate their knowledge in performing real-life tasks. We need to get away from too many paper exams that often may describe how to perform a task or describe the principles behind it, but not actually indicate if students can do it. Also, of course, the platform can integrate with any LMS. I often refer to EON's platform as a kind of digital encyclopedia that you can activate and bring alive. The structuring of the platform has two parts. As you see here, on the left-hand side, the AVR platform, which I've just described, and on the right-hand side, the Vault. The Vault consists of a large catalogue of AR and VR applications made over a period of 20 years. And these have been created in partnership. They are sophisticated applications that address specific needs, such as heart surgery or ophthalmology or welding, and they are certified by academic experts. What's more, the Vault is also a marketplace. You, as a partner with EON, can develop applications, put them in the Vault, and get 70% of the revenue. We've coined the term EASI, easy, to describe the AVR platform, and you'll see why in the following slides. Cognitive load theory, which has been quite influential over the last 20 or 30 years, suggests that we have a limit to what we can actually take in, and that when you're, as a teacher, when you're creating material for students, you need to think about whether the cognitive load is going to help them to learn or not. And one of the things that this research has discovered is that with PowerPoint slides, if you actually read out the text that's on the slide, word for word, you interfere with people's ability to understand it. It's quite interesting. So what you really should do is simply allow people to read it without talking. And even though that seems to be counterintuitive and it's very difficult, and in fact, I've fallen into that sin during earlier slides, for the following slides, I'm simply going to let you read them. Having worked in universities for a long time and watching how the current technological revolution has had an impact, I've seen certain patterns in faculty responses. There are, of course, many faculty who are keen to adopt new approaches to their teaching, but there is also some wariness on the part of a number of people. Is it meaningful, or is it a gimmick? Is it too time-consuming, not only to set up, but to maintain? I don't have any technological expertise, so how will I manage it? My teaching has always been okay anyway, so why change it? Will the students mark me down on my evaluations at the end of the semester if I try things that are too novel? All of these questions come up many, many times. But I hope that some of those fears and worries may be allayed, both by the evidence and the ease with which you can create experiences for your students. In the next two slides, I'm going to go through creating a 3D lesson. And I'm quite purposefully doing this as a teacher might do it, with some deliberateness and thought. I hope it gives you a realistic picture of how you can explore doing this for yourself and how easy it is actually to work your way around. As a guide to constructing lessons, 3D lessons and 360 lessons, my colleagues at EON Reality have created a template. 3D lesson criteria, and you can see them down here. And obviously the first one is incredibly important, pedagogically sound lesson objectives. And there's a link there to a guide to developing those using Bloom's taxonomy, plus the kinds of activities that you can include in your lesson. Similarly for the 360 lesson criteria. And once again, the importance of having the end in mind, the objectives that you want to achieve by the end of the lesson, and that will help you to guide you in the way that you actually create the activities and so on. In the earlier video overview of how to use the AVR platform, you saw how you can either choose assets from the library, which is massive and extensive and growing by the day, or you can import assets. And I've chosen in this instance to import the Pantheon from CG Trader because I like the way that it works for this lesson and I like the details and the texturing. So let's go into the lesson, and I'd add that I'm not just doing this to show you the functionality of the platform, though of course that's vitally important, but to give you an example of thinking through a lesson as you're constructing it. If we scroll down on this page, you can see that there's a place to put in the category of the lesson. I've chosen culture and the arts, though I could just as easily have chosen engineering or architecture for this. It depends very much on what kind of emphasis you want to place in your lesson and how you want it to be found. And some tags, and then a brief overview, which is really looking at what the students might have achieved by the end, beginning with the end in mind, as we say in education, and a mention of some of the lesson material, which includes 3 videos. And I've also included the quizzes here because I think that's an important thing for people to know. So let's now go and edit the lesson. So here's the Pantheon. You can have a bit of a look around it. And very quickly, one of the features I'd like to show you is the ability to right-click and expand that so you can actually see some details. I particularly want the students to be able to see the columns and the capitals on the columns, because that's going to be a question and a subject of one of the videos as well. So now I'm going to add an introduction. Click on this icon, and we have the choice here of either text-to-speech for the introduction or uploading your own audio file. I'm going to choose text-to-speech, and of course I could type in here, but in fact what I'm going to do is to save time and cut and paste. One hint here is that actually I found it's more useful if you put in more commas than you would normally use in writing, because it tends to break up the speech and give it better intonation. Then you can choose from a lot of different languages, as you can see here, and of course different kinds of English. And despite the fact that I have an Australian accent, I'm going to choose a United Kingdom accent because I like Amy's voice. And then I'm going to synthesize, and then we can actually hear it.
The Pantheon, in Rome, was built around 118 AD by the Emperor Hadrian.
And that's okay. So now we've got our introduction, and at the end of the introduction she suggests that they should go and look at the video, and then when they've finished the video come back and look at the model. What I think is important in these things is to try and create some kind of sequencing for the students. So now the next thing to do is to put in the first video. Click here to enter it, and we go down here to enter the YouTube URL. And click OK. Now, an important aspect of this particular video is that it provides information about the construction of the dome using different forms of concrete. This is one of the key things about this building, and it's still one of the largest unsupported concrete domes in the world. And it becomes lighter at the top through various layers of different kinds of concrete. So this is one of the most important things. So what I want them to be able to do now is to have that information reinforced in various ways. First though, I'm going to show you about annotations. So here you can see I've already added quite a lot of annotations just to, again, to save time, but now I will add one more so you can see. And here I'm going to add pediment. So now I'm going to add one more activity that is to locate, and I'm going to ask them to locate the dome. So what I need to do is to double tap on an object to locate it. And here we have concrete dome. And in this activity, we can also add timing. It's set at 30 seconds by default, and I think probably 30 seconds is fine, so I'm happy with that. This means that in this activity, the students have 30 seconds to locate the dome. Now, having located the dome, I want to take this a step further. So what I'm going to do is to add a Memo to the dome. So you can see here, there's a concrete dome, the concrete dome annotation. And if I click on that, it comes up with a number, and it gives you the opportunity again to add some text, and if you want to add another video. So I'm actually going to add another voice here. Okay, so now I've put in some more text here, and here I'm actually asking some questions of the students. I don't always think it's a good idea just simply to tell, but now they've had an experience of the dome, they've looked at it, they've seen the video, I'm asking questions. Why are there different layers of concrete in the dome, and what's it composed of? Why are they layered, and what function is in the structure of the dome the hole at the top plays, and so on.
Why are there different layers of concrete in?
Now I want the students to be able to find out what kinds of columns are being used in this building. So I'm going to add one more memo to the columns and capitals. Whoops. And then get them to watch yet another video. So now I've put in some instructions for actually watching the video and then coming out from the video and closely looking at the front of the building.
Watch the video, and when it is finished, right-click on the front of the building so you can pull it towards you and get a close-up view of the carved capitals at the top of the column. Then take the first quiz.
And now to add the second video, which is a video about different kinds of classical columns. So they should be able to identify what kind of columns are used in this building after they've watched the video. So now, to reinforce that, I'm adding a quiz. So now I've inputted all the choices and put the green tick beside the one that's correct. So the next thing I'm going to do is to do an identify. And in this case, I'm going to ask them to identify the rotunda wall. And again, you've got a timer here, and I'll leave it at the default of 30 seconds. For the last sequence, I'm going to get the students to look at an X-ray of this, and then to look at the inside of the building and to pay particular attention to the dome, and then to look at one final video that talks about the internal space of the building, and a final quiz about that. Now, if I go to this red button here, I can actually record my own movements, and it includes recording my own voice. So I'm going to do that now as one of the activities. If you go to X-ray and you X-ray the building, and then you carefully look around the building like this, you can see all of the concentric circles. The bottom reflecting the top. You can also see the shape of the dome. If you look around here, the inside shape of the dome, which is circular, and pull this around. Every way you look, you can see all of those circles looking upside down at the dome. So now I can play that. If you go to X-ray and you X-ray the building, and then you carefully look around the building like this, you can see all of the concentric circles. Okay, so now I'm adding one final memo, and that's to the interior of the dome. And I'm going to make a short memo here. So now I've made one final memo.
Have a careful look at the coffered dome. Coffering refers to the recessed patterns in the dome. Consider the shape and the space it creates. Then watch the final video before completing the last quiz.
So now I'm going to add one final video. And then one more quiz. And now we have one final quiz, asking about the shape that fits into the interior of the dome, and that will come from the final video as well as from the first video. Next, you can see the playback of the saved lesson. Now I'm going to go into the saved lesson and play the lesson. Let's just do a quick run through of everything in the lesson. First of all, if you click in the middle of this bar, you will get the menu for the lesson, and you can see that the intro is first. Of course, students don't have to do things in the same order as they're listed here, and that's quite an interesting aspect of this. Perhaps to do a bit of exploration, you can do it in a different way. But I have put it in a certain kind of order. So let's have a look at the introduction first.
The Pantheon, in Rome, was built around 118 AD by the Emperor Hadrian, though the exact date is not certain. There had several temples on the same site for hundreds of years.
Okay, and now we have a look at the first video, or at least a few seconds of it.
Some experts believe that this is one of the most important buildings the world has ever seen.
Okay, so now let's go to locate. And I need to look for the concrete dome, and I think that's probably it. Let's check. Okay.
Why are there different layers of concrete in the dome, and what is each layer composed of? Can you explain how they are layered, and what function in the structure of the dome the hole at the top plays?
And another video.
Instead of looking at a painting this week, since I'm a little bit pressed for time, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to look at the three distinct orders of classical ancient Greek architecture.
Okay.
Watch the video, and when it is finished, right-click on the front of the building so you can pull it towards you and get a close-up view of the carved capitals at the
And now a quiz about the columns after watching the video. And now to identify.
Have a careful look at the coffered dome. Coffering refers to the recessed patterns in the dome. Consider the shape and the space it creates. Then watch the final video before completing the last quiz.
I'd like now to illustrate a 360 lesson. And I'm not going to create the lesson because really many of the principles of creating a 360 lesson are the same as you have already seen with the 3D lesson. There are, of course, some different functions, but the principles and the approach are very similar. But I'd like to play this lesson to show you a really nice example of two juxtaposed photos, 360 photos, that actually inform one another. And the one that I've chosen is the History of Chinatown. This is Chinatown, Singapore. And one of the reasons that I've chosen it is quite simply because it's my neighbourhood. It's where I live. I'm about 2 minutes walk from this temple and from the streets of Chinatown. So here's the Buddha Tooth Relic Temple and Museum.
The Buddha Tooth Relic Temple and Museum is a religious and cultural institution located in Chinatown, which houses a relic said to be a tooth from Buddha. The Buddha Tooth Relic Temple and Museum was built for the veneration of the relic, to promote Buddhist culture and education and provide welfare services to the public.
So if we look around, we get the context, the immediate environment of the Buddha Tooth Relic Temple and Museum. And we can see if there are any quizzes. The quizzes are able to be embedded in the environment. So let's have a look at this quiz here. Where is Chinatown located? Well, it's actually Outram Park. And then if you click here, you get to the nearby environment. These are the streets that are adjacent to the Buddha Tooth Temple. And once again, you can have a look at what's around. Here we have Smith Street, for example.
Smith Street lies between South Bridge Road and New Bridge Road, and is located at the center of Chinatown. The street is believed to be named after Cecil Clementi Smith, Governor and High Commissioner of the Straits Settlements between 1887 and 1893. Smith Street is also said to be the birthplace of Cantonese opera in Singapore.
Okay, so let's look for a quiz. Okay, so here's our quiz. And we've just been told this one, so it's Cantonese opera. I'm going to run through some sample lessons, just a very, very small number of the lessons that you can access from the platform. And what this shows is not only the variety and range of the lessons, but it's also a good example of just how many there are. Nuclear power plants accidents, how fossil fuel formed, operating theatre orientation, helicopter generator replace, pain removal with anaesthesia, how diesel fuel injection work. Now let's have a look at some pages from the library and the 3D assets that are available. This is a very, very small sample of the massive amount of 3D assets that are available, soon to be 1 million. Truly, EON is an AVR encyclopedia. Before finishing, let's have a quick look at some of the Vault applications just to get some sense of their depth and also their breadth in terms of subject matter. I've said to you before that this is not meant to be a comprehensive view of everything that EON is offering. It's more dedicated towards the idea of how you can easily create lessons. But if you want a really comprehensive view, as I said before, have a look at EON founder Dan Laeskar's YouTube video, the link for which I posted at the beginning on the agenda. You can see from the Vault applications, you can tell just visually how sophisticated they are, and of course how many different topics they cover. These are done by academic experts and they're very highly developed and sophisticated. These applications in the Vault, of course, if you partner with EON and you create one of these, you can also actually earn money from them, get 70%. Virtual anatomy dissection. Ramp handling, you can see the enormous variety, everything from logistics to medical applications. I'm going to finish off with some consideration of AR Assist, because I think this can be used in all kinds of new and innovative ways, particularly with regard to student assessment. I think one of the greatest challenges for universities is knowing how to change their assessment from traditional paper-based exam assessment to assessment that is more meaningful in the way that the learning is applied. I talked earlier about learning transfer and the importance of creating experiences for the students that actually enable them to learn to transfer their learning. And that has to do with the learning experience itself. But it's also very important to make sure that the assessment matches that. And that's where I think the opportunity for AR Assist is ripe for developing into student learning and assessment.
AR Assist helps your workforce perform better. This cross-platform augmented reality solution supports workers with real-time contextual data for their day-to-day tasks. Working across platforms, AR Assist supports Microsoft HoloLens and mobile devices using ARKit and AR Core. In this example, a facility uses AR Assist to help its fire safety team perform their duties effectively. Upon arriving on site and having located the fire control panel, the inspection worker marks its location on the map. Logging his arrival time on site, the system tracks his progress and notifies a controller at headquarters to assist him remotely. Working through his inspection checklist, he marks issues that require attention and generates virtual anchors marking their physical locations. Recognizing this task, the system adds a required tool to the equipment manifest attached to the job profile. The worker also uses the app to relay multimedia supportive materials, adding them to the job profile. Here, the inspector reports an unsafe working condition, attaches a virtual anchor to it, and assigns a task to address it. Back at headquarters, the maintenance visit is assigned to the technician with the proper equipment and scheduled accordingly. On the day of the maintenance, the worker uses AR Assist with the HoloLens, freeing up his hands to perform the work. Opening the app gives him the contextual data support in augmented reality, helping him to perform his job more effectively. Selecting the first task on his checklist illuminates the virtual anchor left by the inspector, guiding him to the component that requires his attention. He accesses the notes left by the inspector and asks headquarters to help him resolve the issue. Recognizing the task at hand, the system offers the proper tool and step-by-step instructions on resolving the issue. Moving through his checklist, the maintenance worker is guided to the safety hazard previously marked by the inspector. Seeing the problem through the live video feed, headquarters is able to offer him remote assistance to correct it. Resolving all tasks and having reported his progress back to headquarters, it's on to the next job. Using AR Assist, enterprises can increase the safety and efficiency of their on-site workers while also gaining new levels of traceability, documentation, and compliance.
Here's a reading list of articles that are related to some of the topics that I've been talking about in this talk today. And some of them are direct references, some of them are not. But as always with such a reference list, you'll look at one and you'll find other things that you would like to follow up. So I hope that you will do that. And there's plenty of new literature coming out at the moment about the effects of AR, VR on teaching and student learning. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much for your attention. But further than that, we would of course like to engage with you. And I am more than happy to chat with you. I'm very passionate about student learning and creating the best possible student learning environment. And I believe that EON Reality AVR platform has a great deal to contribute in that way. So if you would like to get in touch with me and contact me and talk to me about these things, I'm more than happy to do it. Peter Looker, EON Reality Chief Learning Officer. You can look me up and send me an email. Thank you.